So hello, dzień dobry państwu. First, I'm not joking with this trigger warning because there are going to be some medieval dick pics in there. So my speech is about designing historical open world RPG, what pitfalls we met, how hard it was compared to some other game maybe, and also something about our research, our history, and how we actually did it. So first off, something about me. I studied at School of Applied Arts, so I studied also history of art and history in general. I worked on Mafia, Mafia 2, then I founded Warhorse, and now we released Kingdom Come Deliverance. So first of thing, why we made a historical game since nobody makes them anymore or ever made actually. There's no historical RPG released in the last 15 years, I think. And I don't count Assassin's Creed because it's more likely a science fiction game. But then there's no serious historical game out there, and I decided to make one. So why? Because when I was a kid, I drew a lot of such pictures. This is not from me, I found it on internet, so I'm stealing some copyrights. But I drew something like that every single day with my grandmother. And I really like castles, and our country is full of castles and medieval architecture, and I kind of like it. So I wanted to do something from that period, and since I'm Czech, I would like to set it in Bohemia, because for us it's much easier to do it. Because researching, for example, German setting would be a pain for me. I don't speak German. A lot of the sources are only in German. I'm not familiar with German culture, and especially medieval culture, let's say. The same could be said about any different country, so it would be much easier to do it in our homeland. Also, it's much easier for us to write Czech characters, use Czech humor, and kind of do it the way we like it. It would be quite hard for me to try to kind of write characters that are from different culture. But the big question was if anyone will care. Because in the West, sometimes we could be still seen as kind of this former Russian state with weird culture that no one ever heard about. So, and a lot of Czech people have this kind of syndrome that everybody looks at us this way. So a lot of people were saying, like, why do you do it from Czech Republic or Bohemia? Why don't you use something more familiar like England or France? Because everybody knows medieval England and medieval France. Everybody will think that your history is something from some Russian steppe or something. And we were seriously quite concerned about this, if this is going to happen or not. But then my answer was this. Nobody knew about William Wallace before Mel Gibson shot a movie about him. Nobody knew who he was. So nobody knows about our culture because nobody ever published anything from our culture in the West, like historical movie or ever, in last 40 years mostly. So let's do it and we will see if people like it. In the end, it turned out that nobody cared, everybody liked it, and only people who were very skeptical about it were the Czech people. So when we announced the game, nobody cared that it's set in Bohemia, nobody cared that it's done in Czech language, with Czech names and in Czech setting, only Czech people, which is quite ridiculous. So something about my sources. Mostly, the first thing I did when I started planning the game, I studied a lot of books. I spent almost 2 years reading all the different books, starting with historic novels, but also a lot of historic literature. These books are the most important. In the first one, which is called Travels Through Bohemian History or whatever, I found an interesting civil war that happened in 1403, and the other is like 200 years old or 150 years old. It's cultural history of Czech cities, and it's basically a compilation of all the chronicles and mentions about the common life in medieval cities in Bohemia. It has like 2,000 pages, and it takes care about every single aspect of life. So it was quite interesting read, and for a writer, it's very important. The second thing, when I found about the Civil War, I went to the page called Castles CZ, and which is a database of all the castles and historic sites in Bohemia. This is just central Bohemia. The yellow marker is a castle that Silver Skulls, which is the first city in our game. And I have to say that I really clicked on every single castle in this map and read about its history to find out if there's something happened in 1402 or 1403 that I can use in the story for the game. And then I found Silver Skulls, and the only sentence about Silver Skulls, that's the historical background of Silver Skulls, was this sentence. It's in Czech, but it says that like first written memory about the castle is from 1402, when it was surrounded by Emperor Sigismund, and at that time it was ruled by King Wenceslas hetman Racik Kobyla from Dvorec. And after the siege of the castle, Racik Kobyla fled, and the castle was destroyed. That's the only historical mention, and this is the foundation of the story that I started with. And also, this guy was very important. Because he wrote, I would say, my favorite books. It's funny that one of the best historical books about our history was written by a Polish guy, but I really do think that Narenturm or this Hussite trilogy is really special, very well researched. And despite the fact that there are fantasy elements, it's one of the best books about this period of our history. So I really like it. It's one of my favorite books. So it was a huge influence on me, and I also learned a lot of facts from the book because it was very well researched and it depicts the daily life very well, I would say. Then, after I will play you something that we are supposed to show to publishers. I don't have any rights to any material that's used here. It was just for our internal purposes. And it's a video that's called Ripomatic, which is done by developers at the time they don't have anything to kind of showcase what would they like to do. So I don't know if there's going to be any sound. Can we have sound, or is it? So this was a lot of Polish footage, actually. I like those old movies. I would love to catch this atmosphere in the game. So that was also something we used as a reference. Funny thing is that like 30% of the footage was from a movie shot by a guy that's called Vavra as me, but I'm not his relative at all. So something about historical accuracy, because like a lot of people when we released the game started to kind of say that it's not possible, that nothing cannot be historically accurate, if it's important to be historically accurate at all. So something about that. Those people, let's call them relativists, were constantly saying like, we don't know exactly how it was, so we can make it anyhow, or there is no chance to be 100% accurate, so there's no reason of trying to be 80% accurate or something. And that is my answer. Because all those things result in this, which is bullshit. These guys are supposed to be Vikings, and they are not at all. They have ridiculous weapons, they have ridiculous armors, they look ridiculously, they go naked into fight. It's just simply plainly stupid, because actual Vikings look like this. These are my friends here in Poland, in Wolin. Every year there is a big Viking battle, and those guys actually fight there, like thousands of them. And they do a lot of research about how armor and everything looked. And actually, I think they look much more interesting than the movie guys. With the exception of the guy with this cumin helmet in the back, he's not doing Vikings, he's a Hungarian. And there's this guy with a cap, which is a tourist. This relativism can go even further, so then you can say, so, do you have any proof that there was no Egyptian pharaoh traveling around medieval Europe? Somehow he survived 2,000 years, woke up from the grave, and there's no proof that he wasn't, so he could be. And in the end, you can end up with this, like, where's the proof that no one traveled through time from the post-apocalyptic San Francisco to kill Emperor Sigismund and then cleared every evidence that he was there? Well, there isn't any proof, and it's ridiculous bullshit, and it didn't happen, so I'm not going to do it in my game. But in every Hollywood movie, you see such things. They think that something looks cool, so they put it there, and they don't care about how it was. And very often, the actual reality they could research looks better. Kingdom of Heaven is my favorite example. The story of the movie is absolutely different from what actually happened, and anyone who read, who knows what actually happened would probably say that the actual events were much more interesting than what's shown in the movie. So our goal was to gather as much knowledge as possible. We had to extrapolate the things that we don't know, because nobody knows them, but based on the facts that we collected, and then create as accurate and likely representation of 15th century Bohemia as possible. And also we had to make it user-friendly, so, which means that, for example, if we used a language that people spoke at the time, nobody would understand it. Even Czech people wouldn't understand the language, and we wouldn't be able to write in that language because we don't know it either. Also, some of the things have to be kind of simplified because it's a game, so some things you simply have to do some shortcut somewhere for the sake of gameplay or actually user-friendliness or accessibility. What do we know about 15th century Bohemia or medieval times in general? A lot. It also seemed to me that a lot of the people, when they were kind of discussing if we are accurate or not, were absolutely unaware about any historical evidence. So we have a lot of evidence from the time. We have chronicles, we have birth and death records, we have town books which collect a lot of property and accounts of the cities. We have estate records, we have criminal records, we have a lot of art and architecture, of course. We have archaeology, we have local terminology. For example, I'm living in a street that's called Vlašská, which means basically Wallachian, which means Italians, and it's this name is there because Italians live in this city, and it was the guys who built the cathedral in Prague. So somebody invited Italians to build a cathedral. They lived in the city, in the street, and the street since is called Italian Street. We also have genetic genealogy, which I will be speaking about later. So basically, we studied all those materials. We really went to all this. Every time we needed to some evidence or some research, we looked in all those documents. Basically, just to mention some chronicles, the oldest chronicle written in Czech is from 1314, which is 100 years before our game. But the oldest Czech chronicle is 300 years older even. And then Charles IV, for example, wrote his own biography in 14th century. So it's also a lot of, you can find a lot of kind of interesting facts there. Then we have a lot of other books that are dealing with daily life or chronicling some events. For example, this is a city book of Prague, which spans through 300 years, and it's kind of like evidence of records of every record the city needed, so financial records, estate records, and all those things. We also have old maps. This is the oldest preserved map of Bohemia from 1518, but there were also other maps. But even this map shows us a lot of facts about the medieval times, because it not only shows cities, which are still there, and we know them, but it also says what religion those cities were and who ruled those cities. So it's, again, interesting information about 15th century or 16th century. And also we have archaeology. There's a lot of evidence from archaeology. So for example, lately they found a huge graveyard in Bohemia with like thousands of graves. And they started to do DNA research on those people, who they were, if they are, and most importantly, if they are related to current people who live in this area. So they found a vampire in one of those graves. That's the guy on the right with the stone on his chest. So we don't have vampires in the game, but we could. There is one. We have a Viking buried in Prague Castle from 9th century, which is quite interesting because our king most likely had bodyguards from Denmark. So this guy is actually a Viking, and if you know the statue of St. Wenceslas on the main square in Prague, he has a helmet, and it's a Viking helmet with Odin as a nose protection. Most likely. It's still disputed. So it's also interesting evidence. We don't have Vikings in the game, but maybe we could. And on the other hand, this is a grave from 12th century, a lady that was found in a small shithole somewhere in the mountains. And she's from Mediterranean region, somewhere from Italy, maybe Croatia, I don't know. But nobody knows how she appeared over there. And also it was found out through her DNA research. The oldest foreign record about Bohemia, Bohemian kingdom, is from Ibrahim ibn Yaqub, which is a Jewish ambassador of Khalifa of Spain. And interesting thing, this is the whole mention about Bohemia he read. So Czech people were slavers at the time. They collected slaves in Poland and Ukraine and sell them to Turks and Jews in Prague. And we also ruled Krakow at the time, so this is an actual Czech city and you should give it back. So Czech kingdom got rich with slavery, but it was slavery where we were selling Slavic people. And the English word slave actually comes from Slav, so because there were so many Slavic slaves that they used to call slaves slaves. Just an interesting fact. So basically Czech people are mostly Slavs, German, Celts, Vikings for some reason, Balkans and Jews. That's also interesting evidence. And I'm saying it because they recently started to research this to find out if people who live in some places today lived in those places before. So they took DNA from the people that are living there today, and they took DNA from the graves, 1,000 years old, and started to compare them, and they found out that many people actually are descendants of those people from 1,000 years ago. And they also do it through genealogy. So they were looking at the people who have the same surname, and they realized, if, like, you probably met someone with the same surname as you, and you was like, okay, could you be my relative? And it turned out that a lot of those people actually are relatives. Even if they live very far away from each other, there is this one common ancestor. And I'm saying this because we did similar research to some extent as well. For example, the city or the village of Ledečko in the game, I found very old record about which people live there. So we use the same names for the characters in the game. And then when we look at which people live there today, they still have the same surnames. So there's a huge continuity there. And this is, for example, my oldest. I did my family tree, so this is the oldest document I found. It's from 1721, and I know a lot about the guy. I know that he was a gardener, I know when he was born, his children, his parents, everything. But we don't know the details. We don't know if the guy was an idiot, if he was a nice person, if he was tall, smart, what was the detail of his life. Interesting thing, during the research, or some people started to complain again, that there are displays of stuff on old paintings, for example, which means that those things existed at the place at the given time, which is actually not true. So there are pictures in medieval chronicles depicting a lot of weird stuff that never happened. This is very popular in chronicles, like I don't know why, but it's a very common picture. And also, they were quite dirty. So that's another part of the research that we did. Well, first. But the idea is that people in the medieval times were, there are two general cliches about it, that they didn't know anything about outside world, or that there was huge globalized travel and everything was possible and everyone could be anywhere. Both are, I would say, wrong. There was a lot of travel, especially with students who traveled, there was a big university in Prague, and a lot of foreign students, mostly from Germany, some France maybe. Of course, people who could read, monks mostly, have books with references to outside world. A lot of men were going to war to different countries, so they seen the countries this way. There was trade, of course. There were journeymen, people who have to kind of do some blacksmith first before he could start his own business, had to travel to some different city or state and practice there first, and then he could return back and start his own business. And of course, there's a lot of messengers and expeditions and stuff. So the people were quite aware which animals were living in Africa, for example, but they never seen them. Most of them never seen them. So our biggest challenge was ordinary life. So I'm speaking about all this because we had to find out how ordinary people lived, what was their kind of how their world looked like, how they behaved, what they did. And there's a lot of myths about medieval or dark ages. First, people think that it was very puritanical, prudish, which was quite the opposite. Again, dirty picture I warned you about from one of the chronicles. And so priests, for example, had children, lived with concubines, had sex. It was quite common, normal thing. Most villages have a priest, and that priest was drinking with those people. He most likely has a concubine, and he most likely had kids. It was normal. It changed much later. Folks, people could have children without marriage. When you have children with someone, it was considered that you are married. There was no big fuss about it at some times. The period wasn't very dangerous. When there's war or some catastrophe, it was dangerous. But generally, I would say that in many parts of Europe, it was safer than today. It wasn't that cruel as well, like torture or capital punishment was very rare. There are records of very brutal punishments for criminals, but usually it was really the last resort, and it has to be approved by royal court. And surprisingly, if you committed even murder, you can buy yourself out of it. So you murdered someone in a pub fight, and if you paid the family what they asked for and raised a tombstone on some crossroad or consigliere cross at the crossroads, you can buy out of it. But, for example, counterfeiting money and poaching was punished by death. That's like today it wouldn't probably, but at the time it was the worst crime almost. People also were not that much oppressed as we tend to think. They have lower taxes than today, you can say to some extent. And I would say that they lived quite well mostly. So also, and I would say we used all this information in the game. So we studied it. So there is a priest, Bohuta in Czech. There is a quest with him where you get drunk. He has a concubine. There is a moment when one of the nobles wants to execute someone, and somebody tells him, you cannot do it because like you have to get it approved by royal court. And the guy's like, but there's no royal court at the time because we are in a war, so I will do it anyway. So like such little details we really used in the game and try to utilize every information we collected to utilize it somehow in the story or in the gameplay. Again, widows could run businesses. If her husband died, you can run a business. And it's in the game. There is this woman called Zora, whose husband was killed, and she took over his business, and it's one of the quests in the game. Also, nobility was protected from crime. Like if a noble got into a bar fight, even the local bailiff couldn't arrest him. And if he did, he would be punished pretty hard. There's a case when the bailiff basically touched a noble during such event, and he was expelled from the city and lost all his social status and his job and everything. Interesting fact also, I found that medieval taxi drivers were the same as today's taxi drivers. They were kind of doing a lot of cheating and everything, only they used horses and carts instead of actual cars. So the society was split into three orders: those who pray, those who work, and those who fight and protect them, which was the nobility. And unlike historians has to kind of be like this positivism, which means that if they don't have proof that something existed, they cannot expect it to be real, so they cannot publish it in the books. We had big problems with this when we were dealing with the historians, because I asked them, so how did this look? And they were like, we don't know, but we can tell you how it couldn't look. So it was a big problem for us, but as an artist, we had to fill the gaps, because like otherwise there will be like white boxes instead of buildings with the sign, oh, we don't know how this building look, so imagine something cool here. So we had to kind of extrapolate from what we know. And it's funny that for example, one archaeologist told me that it's not possible that there would be such big walls around city of Rataj, which is in the game, but that it's cool, but it was very unlikely that there would be they would have money to build such strong fortification. And then the mayor of the city told me that they were digging public toilets, and they found 3 meters thick wall. So the walls actually most likely were there, and we were right, and the historian was wrong. Another interesting example is this is a helmet called Salet, and the general knowledge is that these things were common in the middle of the 15th century. But the original first record of a Salet is from Italy from 1407, which is 5 years later than our game. But also there is a picture, if you dig a little bit more, you found a picture of something with the signs of like the Salet design from 1340, which is like 60 years before, or 70 years before the first record about the actual Salet. And then you found records about from England from 1420. So that's another, like official information is that the Salets were common in 1420 and later, but is it true? So it's the first written record that we have, but they may used it before, but just nobody recorded it. So another thing, how we kind of sometimes could extrapolate and use something that wasn't very likely, but could be, and it still makes sense that it's possible. So, writing team. We wrote the game in 7 people. A lot of those guys are kind of reenactors, or one of them is historian. So they also had some knowledge about the period. We had on-site historian, which is Polish, actually. We had more than 20 historical advisors, a lot of them professors from universities of history, but also some living history reenactors, fencers, and people like that we have like specialists for every different part of the game. And we have a Hollywood script doctor who was helping us to build the story as well. We built a very huge database of books and facts, and basically we wrote our own history book to help the writers so they don't have to search through the facts themselves. They just ask our historian, and she will research it and give them some article about, oh, this is how it was. And still, we had a lot of pitfalls. We faced a lot of pitfalls. Mostly it's in daily life details. When you're writing something from present time, it's easy. You know how people greet each other, you know what they drink, you know what they wear, how they act. Your awareness about today's society is pretty good. In medieval times, it was absolutely different, and we don't know it. And there is very little evidence about it. There is very little books about it. So it requires a lot of research, or to be ignorant and ignore it. We chose to do the research, and it was quite painful, especially, for example, when we have a quest from a monastery, and you are supposed to be in the monastery for several days and live as monks. So somebody really had to kind of sit down and search how the monks actually lived, what were their daily rituals, how they spoke to each other, what they read. We have actual prayers that they say every day. They have prayer every second hour or something. So we have to find those texts, or somebody has to kind of wrote those prayers. We placed books in the monastery that could be there. We kind of have to find out about their social structure, how they operated, what happened when somebody misbehaved, because the player usually misbehaves. So it was a lot of research. Somebody took, I don't know, half a year to write the quest, including the research. And then we did the research about how the actual building. So just building this, reconstructing this monastery took us about, I don't know, a year and something for several people. And we were facing those things all the time. For example, language was very different. People talked to each other differently. There was very strong social hierarchy. So when you spoke to someone, you spoke differently than when you spoke a noble. They used different greetings, mostly religious greetings. Our greetings from the game became memes on the internet, most likely because God be praised and all those things are not common, and some people don't understand why we used it, because people really did it at the time. So that was really hard, and as a writer, in every single sentence you write, you have to constantly be aware that it was different than today. And for example, nobody can say okay. Nobody said okay at the time. And we had a lot of okays in the text, and we had to kind of edit it and fix it, and we went through the dialogue several times to avoid such modernisms, I would say. But still, we decided to use modern language because, as I said, nobody would understand Old Czech. And then we were kind of playing with the idea of using Shakespearean language, English. But when we tried it, our prototype was actually voiceovered in Shakespearean English, and nobody understood what the people saying. So even the English people had problems understanding what's happening. And we who wrote it didn't know as well. So it sounded awkward, and also the English, and especially Old English, is very different from Czech. Czech is much kind of, have a very different flow and everything, so it sounded quite bizarre. Then we faced another problem with Slavic names that are basically untranslatable to English, so we had to decide if we will keep the Slavic names and force the actors to kind of spell it, most likely in a very bizarre way, or if we will use a different name. So in the end, we decided that we will use those names that are from Latin, like Daniel, Peter, will going to be translated to English. Some of the names could be translated to German. German was the second most common language in Bohemia at the time. And a lot of people have German names or speak German. So we used a lot of German names. And then we kept the Slavic names. And we were afraid that people will have problems like spelling them. But in the end, it turned out to be quite okay. Nobody complained. People are used to very bizarre names from fantasy games. So nobody cared that we have names like Ledečko or Mrchojedy or something that's absolutely alien to English-speaking people. So in the end, we decided to use modern English with some archaic elements. And then we faced another issue that we couldn't use American actors because they have different accents than the English ones. And for English-speaking people, it sounds absolutely ridiculous when they see a medieval village and one guy speaking San Francisco accent and one guy speaking Old English. So we have to pick up the actors with the correct accents as well, so it sounds right. And even then, people complain that some of the accents are wrong. And then the actual research about the events in the game. There was a civil war. The game is basically about the civil war. King Wenceslas, who was kind of lazy, drunk, who didn't want to rule, was kidnapped by his brother Sigismund, and he invaded Bohemia with an army of Hungarian Cumans. This is in Czech, it's my research. It's like fraction of my research about the background of the Luxembourg family. So basically there were two brothers, Wenceslas and Sigismund. One was king of Hungary, one was king of Bohemia, and they were both, could be emperors of Holy Roman Empire. And then there was Prokop and Jobst, who were their cousins and also brothers, and they hate each other. They were constantly fighting for like 30 years against each other, and the weirdest thing was that they were changing sides every single day, and I'm not joking. So basically, this is just a fraction of the research, what happened in the month before the war started. So basically, Jobst made an alliance with Meißners, Germans, against Sigismund was captured in Hungary. Jobst attacked Wenceslas with the Meißners, then fought with his brother, then betrayed Meißners and allied with his brother to fought with their cousin. Then they helped their cousin when he was almost lost. So they changed sides again and joined him. And it was happening every single day. And we have an epilogue in the game that's like 15-minute long cutscene explaining what actually happened. My cutscene editors hate me for that, and it was originally 20 minutes, so I shortened it a lot. And nobody knows what's happening because it's not like, I don't get why they did it. Maybe because they didn't have TV, so they were bored, so they need some fun in their life, so they were fighting with each other. I don't get it, but in history books, usually, generally you would realize that Prokop and Jobst didn't like Sigismund. But that's not true. They didn't like him on Tuesdays. The other days they loved him, and on Fridays they fought with Wenceslas, and on Saturdays they were allied with Wenceslas. It was absolutely bizarre. So the history books are, if you don't dig deeper, they are could be quite misleading. Now I get to some pictures. So we also had to reconstruct medieval landscape. So this is a height map that we bought from some satellite company of the countryside. So we actually used actual map. Then we turned it to this. This is a map depicting different types of flora. So basically every color means different type of vegetation, because the vegetation at the time was very different. This is a detail of that map. So every single color and marker has its meaning. It's for the artists. Then we had a map. This map shows the terrain types, the color of ground and stuff. And then we turned those maps into very detailed sketches like this. This is another, just a small part of this whole sketch. And then we had to deal with things like, for example, road profiles. So these are the different types of the roads we have in the game. An interesting thing, again, coming from the research, is that at the time, or today, every road has kind of this strip of grass in the middle because we use cars and nobody is walking or driving in the middle of the road. At the time it was different because there was usually horses walking in the middle of the road and they have wheels as well, but there was people or horses walking in the middle of the road, so they didn't have this strip. And we don't have it in the game as well, mostly, and it's kind of like our decision, not an accident. So then we made a lot of sketches of the countryside. Even those little walls are kind of research because like people when they were working on the fields, they moved the stones from the actual field and then they built those little walls from them to kind of surround their property. And out of it, we used the height map, so the artist made kind of screenshots of the white terrain and then painted actual countryside over it. Another interesting thing is, for example, when you want to put some buildings on a map, you can still find out where the actual buildings were 1,000 years ago. For example, the mills. The river has this mill, like even today, if the mill is not there, when you look at the river, you will find out where the mills were at the time, because there is still remnants of those mill races, those special little mill races. I don't know the other proper word. So basically, I was researching where to put mills, and I found all those places on the map just by looking at the map. And then when we did some research into it, we really actually found out that there were mills 500 years ago at the place. And the place is still called the same as the mill at the time. So for example, this is a Kuchelník mill probably. And there is a place, there's no mill today, but the place is still called Kuchelník. So it still kept its name from the medieval times. Again, a lot of the things in medieval flora and fauna was different. They didn't have a lot of vegetables like tomatoes, corn, potatoes. They were imported from Asia or America much later. Even the domestic animals were different. Cows were smaller, dogs were different, pigs were more likely wild boars today. And also the forests were different because they were kind of not used as a industrial wood production fields. They were much more diverse with different things. And there is an archaeology about like actual fauna, flora. There's some books about it, and we studied those books as well to build the countryside for the game. For example, today we are used to castles being surrounded by woods. At the time it was absolutely ridiculous because they used all the wood or all the woods for actual building the castle, and then they kept it clean around the castle so they could see as far as possible. So usually there were no woods around cities and castles. They were all used to build the cities, which is kind of, at first sight, it's kind of uglier than today, and our artists had problems to make the places look interesting because there were no trees at all, so we had to do a little bit compromise to make it look better. With architecture, we had some problems with scale. So the world is too small for our collision system, means that NPCs would, in narrow places, would kind of collide with each other and blocked and stuff. But on the other hand, it's too big for AI. So for example, we have these day cycles for every NPC. So you send an NPC to work somewhere, but the time is kind of compressed. So like one day takes place in 1 hour or something. And it's so far away that this person is not able to reach the location within 1 day. So we had to change the day cycles according to the size of the world and do a lot of those compromises as well. This is a picture of just some set of rules that we had to make for the artist, how, for example, the objects could be big, how tall beds and something could be, so it fits with all the animations we have. We have thousands of animations and they have to be normalized so everything fits to everything else. So we did a lot of research this way. We have also this kind of like toy box of houses. So this is like the plans of different types of houses. Each color represents some type of environment, so like sleeping place, working place and stuff. And also we had like, this is just like our system for rooftops. And then we were reconstructing a lot of the things. I wanted to have a windmill. There's no evidence that windmill was there, but we decided, okay, it's a hill, it's possible. There could be a windmill in Bohemia at the time. And we made a lot of things. For example, we don't know how shops look like. Like nothing was preserved, so we had to make them up. And there was like hundreds or thousands of sketches for every single part of the game. This is a research that there's a lot of silver mines in the game. So there was a guy who was for a year researching how silver mines look like, and this is one of the results he produced for the artist, what should be where and what it is and what does it do and how should it look. This is the first model he made for the artist to work on, for example. And then the artist makes sketches, and then we made the 3D world. We had profiles of different types of rivers and streams as well. And every single part of the game was researched and done as it could be or was at the time, as you can see. Another thing was the wall paintings in churches. So we had a special guy who was painting historical religious paintings, because not many of them are preserved today, so we had to make them up. Funny thing is that usually they used faces of people who paid for them. So a lot of the folks that are displayed on actual paintings are actual people who lived at the time, and the painter like painted them as saints or something. So we painted our backers as saints, for example. And this is a reconstruction. This is remnants of old church. And this is how it probably looks. So we reconstructed it in the game, and this is the process, and this is how it looks in the game in the end. So I'm running out of time. Can I have like 5 more minutes? Okay. And our design philosophy, that gives me to our design philosophy. So we decided that we kind of want to make a time machine experience. We really want to put you in medieval times and make it as accurate as possible so you can experience how people lived. And we utilized all those things I just spoke about in the actual game design. So there is a Father Goodwin quest with the drunken priest that has a concubine. There were Waldensians who were kind of heretics from Germany or France. There is a quest with them, so we showed religious kind of issues at the time. We have a quest about searching for the new priest for a destroyed church. We have millers as a local kind of like thieves guild, because millers at the time actually really were kind of like selling stolen goods, because they were on remote locations very often, and a lot of people came there, so it was kind of like the easiest place where to hide stolen stuff or kind of trade it with someone. We have this monastery quest where we show how monks actually lived. We have this night watch quest where you kind of perform a daily life of a town guard, and you fight with a noble, and you are punished for it. So really you try to utilize those things in the game. Another thing is we have alchemy and herbalism. Some people again complain that it's kind of like fantasy element. It's not. The alchemy is actually based on the old alchemy. A lot of the recipes are actual recipes that we found. And of course, this is one of the areas where we did this kind of like user-friendly sidestep, because for example, you need to heal yourself in the game somehow. So yeah, we have healing potion. It works a little bit harder than in normal games, but it's still kind of like fantasy element, but you need to heal yourself in a game. Otherwise, it will be unplayable for normal people. Again, we did a lot of research for clothing and armor. Basically, I studied for several months how people clothed, because everything was named differently and the whole thing is different. We have 4 layers of armor, so we had to really research it a lot. And in the end, I wrote 80-page book about medieval clothing for our artists. And then we contacted people who actually produced the clothing and armors and worked with them as well. And here you can see just like the amount of variants of everything that we have to have. Saddles, again, a lot of different weapons, a lot of research went into this as well. This is the guy who is actually a member of Longbow Society, so he was showing us how hard it is to draw a bow and stuff. this is our lead designer Victor, and I'm going to cut him with a sword because we had some sword fighting trainings as well, and then we use actual medieval, Hema people or sword fighters during our capture sessions. And we also produced a medieval encyclopedia as part of the game, so we have a codex in-game that sums up in less detail than we actually have everything we collected about the medieval life, and it's part of the game, so everybody can read it and understand why it's done this way. And we put, those illustrations are made by our artist, and so the codex is illustrated, and it's quite awesome, I would say, with such kind of medieval-like illuminations. And that's about it. We tried quite hard to be as accurate as possible. We are aware that it's not possible to be absolutely accurate, but in the end, the most grateful people who I spoke to were the historians and reenactors and living history reenactors, because they all, like, it's their dream come true. Nobody put as much effort, they tell me, as we did into recreating the medieval world. Actually, one of the Czech universities is going to use our game to teach or to show history and culture, so they will also point out the mistakes that we made. But again, they told me that it's probably the biggest or the best depiction of medieval life, so they choose the game because of that. And some of the things are bizarre in Medieval Chronicles. So, thank you very much. I don't know. I don't know if we have time for questions.
Perhaps too short, because we are running out of time.
Thanks. I have a question about the timeline, because the game is set in 1403, and why it's not set, for example, 10 or 15 years later, when happens one of the most interesting period of Bohemian history?
Yeah, because, like, for example, we wanted to start the game with the Battle of Greenwald. Like, because we wanted to have a big battle, and this was the biggest battle that happened around the time, anywhere close. But then we decided that it's too big, too epic for us, and so for the first game we decided to be a little bit down with the scope. So even then it's so big, it's really big. But that was like kind of decision to keep the production value cost lower. And to kind of build our technology and prepare ourselves maybe for something bigger if we are able to do it.
Okay, so do you plan, for example, to go into Hussite works and, for example, create, I don't know,
it would be nice.
medieval city of Prague?
It would be nice.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, one last.
Or you can scream.
So I'd like to congratulate you on shipping this game because it's huge, and I was a backer on the Kickstarter, so congrats to you.
Thank you.
And I'd like to ask, would you consider adding contemporary Czech dubbing to the game? Is it possible? I know lots of people asked about it.
Voiceovers, you mean voiceovers?
Yeah.
That's something we discussed a lot. I would love to do it, but we have 110 hours of voiceovers. So just like the cost would be big, but that's not the biggest issue. The biggest issue is the time. So it took us, like, I don't know, half a year to record English, German, and French voiceovers, each one. So half a year for English, half a year for German. So it would take us half a year for Czech as well. And I would still love to do it, for example, for some Game of the Year edition or something, but it's very problematic. It's very time consuming, and so that was the only reason.
I see. Okay, great. And if I can ask one more question, so what are the plans for the next parts of this story?
There are some plans, I can say. It's like we are working on something, but I can't say yet.
Okay, thank you, and again, congratulations.
Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Mr. Dan Vavra from Warhorse.
Thank you.